We recently worked with folks at the International Vaccine Access Center at Johns Hopkins University to make some state-level immunization reports. I want to show you some of the things we did to hopefully inspire you to think about reports like this that you might be able to make yourself. Okay, so what you're looking at is the website for the International Vaccine Access Center. They have the state-level briefs. They wanted to be able to show data in PDFs to folks across the US to see kind of like what's happening at each state. So here, for example, you can see Alabama. You can see the proportion of 2-year-olds fully protected with DTaP vaccines. Unfortunately, as you can see, vaccination rates are below the targets. We also show kind of like neighboring states here. You can see proportion of kindergartners protected. Then there's a section on vaccine exemptions, public health spending, universal vaccine purchasing, and then looking at various bills that have been either enacted or not, but whether or not they support immunization across the state. So you can see all three in Alabama, for example, weaken vaccine safety nets. Then we have disease status, particularly focusing on measles, because there unfortunately have been a bunch of measles cases. So for example, actually, if I switch over to Texas, not to pick on Texas, but if I scroll down here, 802 cases of measles. So let me show you the process of making reports like this, because there are multiple steps involved. What you're looking at now is Canva. This is a design tool that the client used to give us the design for the reports. And so this is just a sample report for the state of Maryland. And you can see it looks pretty similar. Now, we, in our view, made some improvements to the charts, but you can see the basic structure as it exists here. So let's talk about how we went from Canva to code in R in order to make these reports. What you're looking at now is the GitHub repository that we used for this. We've got information about how it all works. There's information about the data. Then if we scroll down here, there's information about how to run all of the reports. And then there's information about how the reports work. All right, so if I flip over to Positron and open up, for example, the report.qmd file, I can hit the preview button here, which will render it, and I can see the report for, in this case, New Hampshire. This is a parameterized report, and so we make it using parameterized reporting techniques that we use throughout much of our work. So you can see we get the report here for New Hampshire. Let me just give you a quick run through of how the report works. So first you've got, for example, here, you can see that we're using types. That's a way to make PDFs. We've got some template partials, types template and types show. I'll talk about those in a little bit. We've got parameters here, in this case for the state of New Hampshire. Then down here, we've got our code. In the first cell here, this code chunk, we are actually basically importing all of our data, as well as we're running source R charts. Here in the charts.r file, we have all of the code to make the various charts. So if I look over here, for example, we've got these charts, this chart, the maps as well. The code for that is all in this charts.r file. And we kind of just separate it out because otherwise the code for the report.qmd would be even longer than it already is. Okay, so we're doing a bunch of stuff here. For example, reading in data, CSV files from the data clean folder. So in this case, data clean total measles cases.csv. We're doing a bunch of other stuff here, and then we're kind of dynamically setting some values. So the filter value, we filter data for different states in different years. So this allows us to kind of hard code that here so that when we run the reports for that particular state, it is filtered appropriately. If I just scroll down here, all of this is just importing data in different ways. Okay, let me go all the way down here, still importing a bunch of data. Okay, so let me start with this section here, this vaccination coverage. You can see we've got vaccination coverage. And then we've got this here, maintaining sufficient vaccination coverage is critical. all that, the text. Then we are making a box. So this is making like this background box here. Then we have the title, this chart title, and I'll actually show this is actually using types code. So I'll show how that works in a second. This then is specifying the layout. So we've got this 1, 1 indicates like 2 equal columns. And then here, this code, dtap line df, so that's data that we've imported. Then we have a chart called dtap vaccination over time bar chart. If I actually just copy that and open the charts.r, you can see we've created a function here that takes the data frame and then whatever the name of the state is. So in this case, the data frame we're using is that dtap line df, and then the state title is the name of the state, in this case, New Hampshire. Same thing then here, we're making this chart. And you can see then we make this chart here. I'm going to actually scroll down to, let me find disease status. So we've got disease status here. And then we're making the measles map, which shows up here. Okay. And again, if you look in the charts.r, you can see the measles map. Now, one interesting thing I want to show you is that the text, for example, here is actually dynamic. And so here, this text content, measles outbreaks can indicate insufficient vaccination coverage. The map below visualizes the number of cases reported in state titles, so that's dynamic, and neighboring states between January 1st, 2025 and measles cases updated date. So if I actually search for that, we actually import that up above. And so then this is like dynamically generated, this text, depending on when we last updated that data. All right, so that is how we kind of make these reports. A lot of it is just kind of straight markdown, but there is some kind of dynamic stuff and stuff specific to types as well. So I said earlier I was going to show you how we use types. That's actually a bit complicated. I'm going to make another video to show that. Let's just keep focusing how the overall report flow works. All right, so I'm going to open up the render.r file. What this does is it actually renders all of the reports. So we give this to the client and we just say basically hit select all, run it, and you'll get all of your reports, which is accurate. It will. Now, first what we do is we load a bunch of packages, then we're importing data. So we've got import data.r. This just imports data. Actually, we kind of tweaked their code, but they basically did this to import all of the data. And so whenever there's new data, they can just update it. And again, we add that source here so that whenever they render, it first actually imports the new data. Then if you saw up here, there are state flags. So we have to use those. We load all the state flags. So that becomes called states flags. In fact, I'm going to run down to here. Then I create a vector for the states, which just has every single state. We actually removed Puerto Rico. We were going to do it, but the data wasn't ready. Then we create the state QMD files. So we say if the directory exists, the documents directory, then we print deleting documents and reports. So for example, I run that. So in the console, did it exist? Oh no, I already deleted it. So we basically want to delete that so that it doesn't exist so we can kind of start from scratch. Then we create a folder called Documents, Assets, Flags. Nothing's in it right now. We also create a reports directory. Then we have a function that creates the state QMD file. So it basically copies the report.qmd to documents and then the name of the state.qmd. So for example, if I run that and do walk on states, you can see now I have Alabama.qmd, Alaska.qmd. Okay. Next, we copy various assets. So that's things like logos. There's some, if you remember those arrows that show whether or not the policies support or go against vaccine coverage, then we use those arrows for that. We're also copying the types files. I'm actually just making this slightly easier to read. We also copy the charts.r file. We're copying all of this into the documents folder. Okay, so if I go down here, if I go documents, assets, you can see that coins got copied. Did that not get copied? Yeah, for some reason it didn't all run. So for example, all the flags are now copied. It's just because we need the assets in the right place in order to render each report. Typically with parameterized reporting, we just use like a template.qmd, but here we actually had to make one report, one QMD for each state, just because of some particularities in terms of how Quarto works. Next, we're actually changing the parameters because, for example, if you look at Alabama, it says state New Hampshire just because we copied this file. So this basically takes the parameter of state and then substitutes in the name of the actual state. So now if I look at Alabama, you can see, there we go. All right. Then we need to change the path data. So rather than looking for data clean, we actually have to tell it to go up one level. And so, for example, if I look for data clean, this won't actually work because we're now in the documents folder. There is no data clean in the documents folder. So we do a walk, and there you can see now it goes up one level to this data clean. We could also do that with the here function. We didn't actually do it. All right, next, we're going to render all of our reports. So we're going to say basically for all of the states, just to show you if I run just that gives me the names of all the reports. It will render them. Okay, I went ahead and rendered a couple reports. If I look in the documents, for example, I can see Alabama and Alaska were rendered. Now, normally I would just let this go, so it renders all of them, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to do it with these. Then what we do is we look for all the reports that are PDF documents. So we create this all reports, which says the reports that exist in the documents folder are alabama.pdf and alaska.pdf. And then we just move these from the documents to this reports. So you can see if I run that, now Alabama and Alaska show up there. So the client, when they run this, they'll just get all of the reports showing up in this reports folder. There's also some code at the end where we're uploading things to Google Drive. We don't want the client to have to run this, so we set up an if statement here so that if it is detecting an environment variable called Google Drive email that has the text rfortherestofus.com. So in other words, basically, if it's someone at rfortherestofus, then it will run, but for folks at Johns Hopkins doing it, it will not run. And so that's the basic process of generating these reports, going from a design for one report and making it dynamic so that we can automatically generate multiple reports at once.